I think we'd like to spend some time having a prayer for Thailand, and we're aware that there are some in the group who are headed back to Thailand, who are still serving in Thailand. And so we want to particularly ask God's blessing on you and the work you're doing there. And we are going to go right into that prayer for Thailand. And afterwards we'll have a few more things on our agenda. But if you'd like to say anything before.
Okay, thank you. Well, I thought about doing a 30-minute prayer, but I decided I would cut that back to 10 and just talk for about 20 minutes first. What time is lunch, by the way? Do we have time for a few remarks? One privilege I had through our leadership training school, or meetings, whatever you want to call them, I got to go with Ajahn Weerapone, and we had some meetings at his home over in Kanchanaburi, and through that I met a former leper man who had been healed, and he lived in a place called Ulopsimun. I think that's 10,000 ulop trees, I believe is what it's called. Little village between Kanchanaburi and back on this side. And so I got to preach 3 revivals there and got to know the people. It's a wonderful little group of non-aligned Christians. And the first time, Sunday morning when I was preaching, I kind of got on to them about a few little things about their worship, but tried to do it in a nice way. Well, after the sermon, they have this annual meeting in August, and the deacons sit right up beside the pulpit on either side. And when the preacher gets through, then they stand up and give a critique of what was said. And I remember saying something about worshiping the Spirit. Doesn't mean you have to get all worked up and shouting and hollering. It means to put your mind to what you're saying. The way I interpret it, it makes sense to me. And they hadn't been doing that. We had a beautiful, special music. A couple of the girls sang, and it was so wonderful, the first verse. Well, by the second verse, all of the instruments kicked in. They had some drums and some renats and some pieces of wood to slap together. And it got really loud and happy, you know. But nobody could possibly, I couldn't even figure out what was being said because there was so much racket. And so I just mentioned, you know, we're supposed to focus on what we say to the Lord and not let all that's going on around us distract our minds. Otherwise, we can't really worship if we don't know what we're saying. And one of the deacons got up and he said, I don't know why this old white guy would come out here and try to tell us how to do things, but he said, you know, he's right. Then the other night I was praying when I went to bed, and I said, Lord, thank you for the food. And all of a sudden I realized, you know, I didn't have my mind on my prayer at all. So I thought about critiquing our sermon this morning.
Go for it.
I don't know if y'all have this problem, but doing deputation work, and usually I'll have something planned to say, and when I get there, the special music was so wonderful this morning. Great is thy faithfulness. I have it on my the funeral service I made out for myself as one of my favorite hymns. And everything that happens, this great message we heard. Actually, I thought about Bill preaching to us at fun night one night about how he got the victory over chewing gum.
Praise the Lord.
If you heard that, I'm sure you still remember. I chewed some this morning, to be honest.
Oh, well.
But I thought about a lot of things I'd like to say this morning, and to keep it brief, after I sat here and I'd seen some of you and how wonderful it is to see you, I thought about an experience when Elmer Nielsen, some of you remember him, he served as an interim pastor at Calvary Church for a year. after they left Singapore. He and I were in college and seminary together. And so they came out to Chacheng Sao, and I took him with me. Took him with me. I think his wife may have been along, and some other Chinese folks from Singapore that were visiting. And we had a little clinic once a month from the hospital. Went out to Dong Yang Nong Na and Bung Chap and some other places out that way. And Vera, I'm sure, went on some of those earlier, and some of the rest of them probably did. But one of the homes we went to was a elderly little Thai lady. She must have been about 80 years old at that time, just very small. Ba Su. I can't remember if her name was Su or some other short name. But I had Elmer with me, and we had a little service on her front porch there. And afterwards, or before, Elmer had on short sleeves, and she reached over and she was feeling his arm. He had blonde hair and very silky little hair on his arm. And she was just rubbing her hand up and down like that. And she said, you know, I never thought I'd see anything as wonderful as this in my life. Well, that's kind of the way I feel this morning. I'm ashamed that I don't recognize hardly any of the MKs. And so if I don't call you by name, you just outgrown me, I guess you could say. Gotten more mature. I'm awfully sorry to hear about Cheryl. We got in trouble because of her one time. When Bob and Jeannie went to Hong Kong for an Orient Missions Conference. I think it was in about 1961 maybe. And we kept Cheryl. And she was a little tiny thing. She was older than she looked, you know, because she was so small. And she was so wonderful to carry around because you didn't have to hold her head or anything. I mean, she's very strong and just so affectionate. And we felt bad when Bob and Jeannie got back to the house to get her, and she said, no, I want my mama. She's looking at Maxine. But what got us in trouble, I know the Foreign Mission Board folks have never did this again, but they messed up one time. And they had our name in the commission as being the new parents of Cheryl Spear. And we got a real kind of, not nasty, but a little bit of a feisty letter from Maxine's mother. We had to hear about our new granddaughter from some people. They read the magazine. Why didn't you tell us about that? So I'm really sorry, and I certainly keep her on our prayer list.